Welcome. This is Jeff Harris of the Broadway Baptist Church in Lexington, Kentucky's Truth Seekers class with a presentation of today's lesson. Today's lesson is Shaking Off Fear. It's part of the series When Emotions Rise. Since today's lesson is about fear, can you remember any moments of fear in your life? There's an urban legend that says some boys and girls were at a party one night and they were near a graveyard and they were talking about how scary it was. "Don't ever stand on a grave after dark," one of the boys said. "The person inside will grab you. He'll pull you under." One of the girls said, "That's not true. It's just a superstition." The boy said, "I'll give you $1 if you stand on the grave." The girl said, "A grave doesn't scare me. I'll do it right now." The boy handed her his knife. "Stick this knife in one of the graves," he said. "Then we'll know you were really there." The graveyard was filled with shadows and was as quiet as death. The girl said, "There's nothing to be scared of," but she was scared anyway. She picked out a grave and stood on it. Then quickly she bent over and plunged the knife into the soil and started to leave. But she couldn't get away. Something was holding her back. She tried a second time to leave, but she couldn't move. She was filled with terror. "Something has got me," she screamed, and she fell to the ground. Later, when she didn't come back, the others went to look for her. They found her body sprawled across the grave. Without realizing it, she had plunged the knife through her skirt and had pinned it to the ground. It was only the knife that had held her. She had died of fright. I can remember one time working on a roof during the rain, and I was trying to put plastic over it to protect the roof from the rain. I just about got done with the plastic when I suddenly lost my footing and I slipped. I started sliding headlong towards the edge. I could see the concrete below and was fighting like crazy to keep from going over. That was a scary moment. Fear is normal, but sometimes we need help to combat it. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 27, "Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." In 1 John 4, verse 18, it says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear." So is fear sin? But in Psalms 111, verse 10, it says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." It says in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 15, it says, "While he remembered the obedience of you all, how with fear and trembling you received him." In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 5, it says, "Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters, according to the flesh, with fear and trembling." And in Philippians 2, verse 12, it says, "Wherefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling." So should we fear? I thought it said before we shouldn't be afraid. Which way is it? If it is sin to fear, then why does the Bible tell us to be fearful? We'll try to discover this as we go through the lesson today. Just a quick background of Psalms 91. Some say Moses wrote it, just as he did Psalms chapter 90, the previous chapter. Some say David wrote it at the time of his census in Israel's great pestilence from God. Jonathan Gill's commentary says the best way to understand Psalms 91 is that it's about every godly man who is always safe under the divine protection. Psalms 91, verses 1 through 6. "He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God, in him will I trust. Surely he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings shall you trust. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrows that fly by the day, nor for the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor for the destruction that wastes at noonday." Notice the language in these verses that portray fear. There's the fearful image of a bird being trapped in a bird snare, just like somebody who is hunted by men. There is the awful pestilence. This could be the image of a pandemic where there's death all around. There's also the terror by night. Some say that is terror of devils or even men. This is the fear of someone being haunted by shadowy figures. Notice in verse 2 that he says, "God is my refuge." The refuge brings to mind the cities of refuge where people would run to for safety from being hunted by somebody. He also says in verse 2, God is his fortress. This brings to mind a mighty fortress that's fortified against all attacks. In verse 2 it says, in God will I trust. In verse 3 it says he will surely deliver you from the bird snare. In verse 4 it says that God will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings shall you trust. Under his wings gives you the image of a mother hen covering her chicks. In Matthew chapter 23 verse 37, Jesus said, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you that kill the prophets and stone them which are sent unto you, how often would I have gathered your children together, even as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you would not. In verse 4 it says, his truth shall be your shield and buckler. Both the shield and buckler were useful in fighting in battles. The small shield is a buckler and the big shield is a shield. And God is saying that he is both the buckler and the shield. In verses 1 and 2, the writer invokes the names of God, 6 of those names. The first one is Most High, which means he owns everything. There's the Almighty, another word for that is El Shaddai. He is Lord, or Yahweh, which means I am. It was the Hebrew covenant name. He is refuge, a shelter from danger. He is fortress, a secure place. He is God. He is Elohim. He is the Creator. So in verses 1 through 6, when fear strikes, we have some mighty names to back us up. We need to trust in God's power. Psalms chapter 91 verses 9 through 13 say, because you have made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, your habitation, there shall no evil befall you, neither shall any plague come near your dwelling. For he shall give his angels charge over you, to keep you in all your ways. They shall bear you up in their hands, lest you dash your foot against a stone. You shall tread upon the lion and adder, the young lion and the dragon shall you trample under your feet. Notice that in verse 9, 3 names of the Lord have been invoked. There's the Lord, my refuge, and Most High. And because those names have been invoked, it says no evil will happen to you, and neither will any plague come into your house. In Luke chapter 4, verses 10 and 11, during the temptation, Satan quoted Psalms 91, verses 11 and 12, and tried to get Jesus to jump. He was tempting Jesus by saying that the angels would watch over him and his foot wouldn't be dashed against a stone. Well, we shouldn't abuse or tempt God by doing foolish things to see if God will keep his word. See Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. In verse 13, it says, you will tread upon the lion and the adder, which is a poisonous snake, and upon the dragon. You'll trample them under your feet. Notice that the devil is also described as a roaring lion, as a snake or a serpent, and he's also described as a dragon. Now, this is a figurative speech, and it's not to be taken literal, but it's to say that God does have powers to help us. So in verses 9 to 13, when fear strikes, we should trust God's protection from the angels and from his powers. Psalms chapter 91, verses 14 through 16 say, because he hath set his love upon me, therefore will I deliver him. I will set him on high, because he hath known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver him and honor him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. In verse 14 it said, God protects his own. Who are his own? Those whose heart is set on God, devoted to God. Verse 14 says he will deliver those who know his name. Well, who knows God's name? To know someone is to have an intimate relation with that person. God's name was to be honored at all costs. That's the third commandment. So whoever knows and honors God will be delivered by God. God says in verse 15, whoever calls upon him, he will answer him and deliver him from trouble, and he will honor him. In verse 16, he says he will also give that person long life and show him his salvation. Well, it's interesting to know that his salvation, or God's salvation, in Hebrew is Yeshua, which translated into English is Jesus. So God will show him Jesus. So to summarize, when fear strikes, trust God's power, trust God's protection, and walk with God. How do we conquer fear? Know who has your back. And who has our back? Jesus. So to wrap this lesson about fear up, Jesus said in Luke chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, And I say unto you, my friends, be not afraid of them that kill the body, and after that have no more that they can do. But I will forewarn you whom you shall fear. Fear him which after he hath killed hath power to cast into hell. Yea, I say unto you, fear him. Who has the power to cast in hell? Only God. So we should fear only God. To answer the question that we posed previously, when is fear wrong? It's when we fear somebody besides God. When is fear right? When we fear only God. Thank you for joining us in today's lesson.